Hi there, I'm Yusuke. I am an engineer working on this open source project called aep.dev. And today I'm here to give you a little bit of an intro to the project, what it's about, what we're trying to build, and how you can get involved. So first off, I wanted to talk about what the AEPs actually are. They're a fork of a Google-owned project known as google.aep.dev that contained a lot of API design guidance and best practices for protobuf and gRPC APIs. But AEP is the fork of that, and what we're trying to build is an API design specification and tooling ecosystem. AEPs are short for API Enhancement Proposals, and we're a group of engineers and PMs across a variety of companies that you can see here working together because we're passionate sort of about what we're building. And if you want to find out more, you can just go ahead and go to aep.dev or github.com/aep-dev. So we already talked a little bit about what the goals are, but I wanted to dive into that a little bit more deeply. So first and foremost, we're trying to produce a set of design patterns and best practices in resource-oriented API design. From that set of design patterns and best practices, we're trying to produce a very precise specification that encodes these. So, it enforces things like the standard methods around create, read, update, delete, and list how you would expose custom methods, what types of fields or properties those APIs can consume during a request or return as a response. And we're trying to take that specification and make it something generic that can be applied to multiple protocols. And so today our scope is gRPC and HTTP and JSON APIs exposed and documented via OpenAPI. And with that specification, we're trying to build an ecosystem of all sorts of tooling. So linters, stub generators for services, clients like command line interfaces, UIs, Terraform providers, API documentation, and more. So I wanted to dive into a little bit more into why we're making the AEPs. And so a lot of us are really passionate about this idea of an API specification, something that helps eliminate a lot of the inconsistencies that we've seen in REST APIs. So things like consistency guarantees around the actual request, structure around the paths, the naming, how you expose those CRUD operations, the types of fields that these operations support. And from that bedrock, we're trying to build a layer on top of that that includes a lot of design patterns that you don't typically see standardized. So things like long-running operations. If a creation of a VM cluster takes a couple hours, right, you have to basically send a request and at some point pull back and see what the status of that request is. Things like singletons and things like resource revisions as well. So this comes up a lot, and that's why I want to touch on the topic a little bit more deeply. But AEPs are a fork of AIPs, and here's kind of how they're different. So AEPs, we're trying to target all engineers, not just Google engineers or Google as an organization. We are trying to design something that's more broadly applicable and not necessarily sort of bound to existing sort of Google API practices. We're, again, targeting a little beyond gRPC and having guidance for HTTP plus JSON APIs as well, maybe more in the future. And we're trying to build really an API specification. The AIPs are design guidance, and often there's APIs that don't necessarily follow that guidance 100%. We're trying to build a specification, and we believe with that specification, we can build an ecosystem of tools that can consume those in a highly fluent semantic fashion. And of course, governance. We are governed by a broader organization than just one. And long term, we're looking at being a part of a larger open source organization, maybe the CNCF, something in the Linux Foundation, but that's to be decided. But I do want to emphasize this. APs are not just a fork of the AIPs. Again, we're trying to expand, targeting those HTTP plus JSON APIs and trying to build that API specification. We're really trying to kind of flesh out the ecosystem that we feel like we can really build with good standardized API design. And so I want to take a quick pause here and talk a little bit more about the tooling ecosystem that we're trying to build. So I'm going to move over to one of our repositories called aep.c, which contains our service compiler. But it also contains this great diagram that kind of explains the ecosystem that we're trying to build here. And so you'll see here on the far left, we want to get to the point where a consumer of the AEP project can just define sort of the resources, like a book, a bookstore, a publisher, define the relationships that they have with each of them. And that can easily generate sort of a highly semantic AEP compliant API in both protobuf and open API, HTTP plus JSON. And with that, we can build a whole ecosystem of clients because those APIs follow a very strict standard. And so we're looking at building things like API documentation. For the client side, we're trying to build Terraform providers, which traditionally have been some of the hardest to build and have to work around consistencies around the APIs most often. Building command line interfaces, UIs. We could expand to other things like Kubernetes, custom resource definitions, and operators, LLM plugins, asset inventories. There's a whole ecosystem of tooling that we could build, and some of it's already built, and we'll talk about that in the future videos. And so last but not least, I wanted to give a little bit of a plug to get more involved. So first of all, we'd love people to just try out aep.dev. So you can go visit the homepage, aep.dev, to learn more. We have a lot of information about sort of what we already offer around API design, our service generator, and our command line interface, Terraform provider to come soon as well. And if you want to contribute back, we'd love to have you do things like working on our protobuf open API generator known as APC. We've got multiple clients that we'd love to build and use that as ways to improve the API guidance itself. If you have feedback on the API guidance, we definitely welcome that. And lots of smaller improvements for those who just want to get their feet wet and get more involved. And if you want to get engaged, just join us at our Slack channel, AEP, in the CNCF Slack. Just search for CNCF Slack on the web, and we'll just join the channel at AEP. Or look at our README. So with that, I want to say thanks a lot for your time. This is the first in a larger video series where we'll be diving into things like fireside chats to talk more about our philosophy or specific design patterns. We'll do an overview of the AEPs themselves, talk about our service stub generator AEPC, as well as some of the clients that we are building as well. That's it. Thank you so much.